Good morning, everyone. Nakasettle na ba ang lahat? All right, let's do this. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. I am Julian Baldo Cubelo, and I am an associate professor at the Department of Communication Research at the University of the Philippines College of Mass Communication. On behalf of the Philippine Media Monitoring Lab, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the last session in our month-long weekly series of research presentations on the 2022 national elections and social media. Today, we will be presenting findings from our cross-platform actor and network analysis. Before we start our session, let me first remind everyone of some housekeeping rules. So may I request, it has been flashed on the screen, but I will just be reiterating some things. May I request everyone to turn off your microphone and to deactivate your camera to filter out any extraneous noise and visuals. However, we are encouraging you to turn on your camera later for our group photo session. Hindi pwedeng mawala ang photo op. You may enter your questions and our comments in our chat box. I will then read your questions and comments during our open forum session. We are requesting everyone to keep this space civil and free from any rude or nasty comments. Thank you very much. So last week, Assistant Professor Marie Fatima Gao and Assistant Professor John Benedict Bukin presented the findings of our Facebook actor and network analysis. And this morning, they will talk about cross-platform actors and networks in the context of 2022 election discourse. Let me again introduce Assistant Professor Fatima Gao and Assistant Professor John Benedict Bukin, our co-team leaders of the Digital Pulse Project. Assistant Professor Fatima Gao's research centers on the mediation of platforms, algorithms, and digital technologies in cultural production, politics, and public discourse. Her recent scholarly works involve theorizing algorithmic cultures, problematizing platform governance, and investigating political influencers and social movements in contemporary media environments. She has published and presented in international and regional journals and conferences. She has a master's degree in digital communication and culture from the University of Sydney and a bachelor's degree in broadcast communication magna cum laude from the University of the Philippines. Meanwhile, Assistant Professor Ben Bunkin uses quantitative and digital research methods to study how network environments shape the communication of political and scientific information. He has presented and published work on the political communication networks of the Filipino youth, networks of online social movements, and political participation, and science communication in various local and international conferences and journals. He earned his MA Communication and BA Journalism cum laude degrees from the University of the Philippines. Please welcome Assistant Professor Fatima Gao and Assistant Professor John Benedict Bonkin.
So good morning, everyone. Okay, so today we're going to do a review of our findings of across the three platforms that we studied and present some patterns we discovered related to the landscape of Philippine elections online. Okay, so this presentation, as mentioned by Ma'am Julian, is the last in our series on the Phase 1 findings of Digital Public Pulse Project, or DPP, a pioneering interdisciplinary research collaboration that inquires about the intersection of digital publics, social networks, media convergence, and this is a project where we also examine the networks of conversations and interactions of online users related to the 2022 Philippine general elections. DPP is organized by the Philippine Media Monitoring Laboratory, Department of Communication Research, UP Diliman, composed of myself, Assistant Professor Fatima Gao, together with our colleagues, Dr. Chen San Pascual, Dr. Hernan Paragas, and Dr. Julian Baldo. We also have our collaborators, Dr. Josh Solano as our data science specialist from UP Manila, and Dr. Jalton Tagibao as our political science specialist. And we also have Rappler as our partner, particularly for the Facebook component of DPP. So throughout the research presentation series, we presented our answer to this question: who and what are the influential electoral candidates, political leaders, and parties, civic organizations, political influencers, and individuals in election discussion on digital media? And again, just a caveat, mapping the election landscape meant systematically monitoring the different types of actors in digital media and how these actors mobilize their political interest. Among these actors are digital publics, so each of us who have a voice on social media when we use the platform to participate in political issues. Um, Please keep in mind that our findings are not representative of the voice of the Filipino voters because not everyone is able to participate online. And there are online users that can be inauthentic, they can be non-human. Our research is mostly interested in understanding how different actors influence political conversations online, whether they are politicians, voters, volunteers, even paid trolls, and sometimes even bots. And DPP is not a public opinion study. No, our investigation is really focused on the social relations between the actors that shape the political discourses, in digital media. So our analysis focuses on the three distinct levels of the network. That's what we did for the past few months. No? We looked into the structural characteristics of these networks, no? Which meant examining the overall connections made by different people, different actors online, engaged in election-related conversations. We also examined, of course, these very actors, no? The actors that made up the network, or the people who post, the people who share and engage in content related to politics. And we looked at the communities or the groups that emerge as users share and interact, regarding these content. And in the past few weeks, we've presented the algorithmic networks presented by channels on YouTube, recommended through its algorithms. We also presented the interaction networks that emerged as people on Twitter retweet, reply, mention, and quote other users in the platform. And the sharing network on Facebook, which form as people distribute and circulate election-related content from pages to profiles to groups. No? And in the next few slides, I'll be presenting some of our key findings, together with Professor Gao, per platform and across platforms. So starting from YouTube, we found that mainstream professional media is the largest community of actors, but it's detached from other communities in the network. There's also a rise in hyper-partisan YouTube political channels that guise their content as news, launch attack campaigns, and distort political popularity. Entertainment media, celebrities and religious organizations are found to be deeply intertwined with political discourses on YouTube. Meanwhile, we found that the camp of Bongbong Marcos is rising in influence and expanding their reach across audiences through the algorithmic cultivation of YouTube communities. And lastly, for YouTube, other candidates we've seen are gaining ground. Moreno entering through entertainment, Pacquiao from sports to politics. But there are also minimal players such as Robredo and Lacson, particularly for YouTube. For Twitter, our results revealed the role of obscure accounts as the most influential and in terms of being popular and being noisy in the platform. And we found that news media is becoming secondary only in influence, particularly for Twitter. Lenny Robredo, on the other hand, is the focal point of both positive and negative interactions. Bongbong Marcos, Manny Pacquiao, and Tito Soto are becoming more central in Twitter conversations. We saw that Bongbong Marcos's interaction cluster has also grown significantly from having no distinct interaction cluster in quarter one to having his own distinct community in quarter two, overtaking Lenny Robredo's. Meanwhile, we have non-political actors such as celebrities and influencers as focal points of interactions in communities, highlighting their ability to mobilize communities for political gains. Lastly, we have socially progressive ideals and sectoral agendas that are only contained within one community, with no mainstream media nor highly central nodes serving as a broker to larger interaction communities. On Facebook, our findings showed that Robredo-related groups are the ones circulating a lot of information in the network, but it's the Marcos and the Duterte-related accounts that are expanding in reach and engaging more diverse communities. We saw that groups are being used as venues to move political content from public venues such as pages and profiles to semi-public and private spaces such as groups. We also saw the similar pattern for news, when it comes to news being the secondary source of political information in the platform. Non-political pages are sharing and serving as sources of political news. There's also the formation of superclusters, particularly during the quarter two. No, that's from October, around that October. No? It's indicative of users overlapping affinities. No? So government and local media, Marcos and Duterte's and Go, Moreno, Lacson, and some Duterte accounts, and then the affinity between or among Pacquiao sports and the gaming community. Um, and then lastly, you have Facebook pages, accounts, and groups aligned with Duterte overlap across multiple clusters, indicating popularity and political bulwark across most communities on Facebook. So all in all, our findings about the Philippine election digital landscape is characterized by three distinct features. First, it's really the shifting relations between different actors. Second is the fluidity of community formation online. And third is platform politics and politics within the platform that shape the discourses of elections in digital media. So from this characterization of the election landscape across the three platforms that we monitored, we came up with 5 key insights. All right, so first, we see the role of new political intermediaries catapulting the growth in influence of politicians in different platforms. There are new intermediaries common across the three platforms, but there are also, of course, unique players among them. So when we talk about these intermediaries, we speak here of actors that facilitate, for example, the spread of influence of politicians so they can eventually reach the larger public. In traditional politics, you have campaigners, advocates in the media as your political intermediaries. But in digital spaces, it's a different story. For YouTube, we saw the rise of influencers and content creators as a source of political news and information. For Twitter, you have here your obscure accounts, but also have here some bloggers who became the focal points of interaction about politics and even sources of political information. While in Facebook, you have non-political accounts serving as sources of political information, while political groups serving as spaces for political interaction. So these new intermediaries are able to reach unsuspecting audiences who may be susceptible to covert campaign tactics. Politicians, meanwhile, can strategically use these venues so they can, utilizing non-political and non-traditional intermediaries, so they can expand their reach, and convince political fence sitters, or still people who are undecided when it comes to, people who they want to vote for. In some cases, these intermediaries may not be covered by election-related policies or standards and principles that are typically followed by intermediaries that are institution-based. So this gives them the freedom to engage in potentially abusive campaign activities. Our second key insight that we derive from our cross-platform analysis is showing really the porous structures of digital communities. So we may not be as closed off from each other as initially thought. The affordances of platforms in particular enable individuals to go in and out of communities. So these affordances, for example, enable users to bring politics wherever online. So from political pages, such as here in our Facebook network, to non-political Facebook groups. Okay. Which serve as a catch basin for political content. And again, affordances enable people to go in and out of all of these communities. Okay? Different communities can also be bridged by actors with identities outside of politics. So Manny Pacquiao, for example, is able to bridge non-political communities such as boxing to groups that primarily talk about politics. There are other cases such as this, such as Isko Moreno's link to entertainment videos, serving as a bridge from the entertainment world, to political content on YouTube. So what this means is that you have users, that can still be exposed to cross-ideological conversations. So we don't have to be trapped in, what scholars refer to as echo chambers, or these rabbit holes or silos. We can be exposed to perspectives that are diverse. And platforms have mechanisms that allow people to cross over. But then this requires deliberate and conscious action from users. They have to consciously use the features of Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And after all, the algorithm adjusts, to the behaviors of its users. Okay? But this porousness can also be exploited. There are users who deliberately enter other communities so they can launch incendiary attacks or they can propagate falsehoods. And the third insight here relates to the towering size of news media across platform. Yet, this size operates alongside their detachment from audiences in the platform, and their declining influence. In YouTube, they comprise almost a quarter of the network for the quarter two. So that's one fourth of the whole quarter two network. For Twitter, almost half, 46.16, when we combine all the media clusters that are present, in the quarter two network of Twitter. And for Facebook, that's almost one third. That's around one third, of the whole network. When you combine media clusters one, which is the biggest, and media cluster four. And the fact that most news media, they're located within the same cluster. So we see Rappler, Inquirer, ABS-CBN, they're located in just one cluster. It's sort of indicative, that they're reaching the same set of news reading audiences. And the declining centrality of news media as an actor that's overtaken by other actors such as obscure accounts on Twitter or political pages on Facebook is detrimental to the political knowledge of voters who rely on social media for political information. They might be getting political information from sources that do not possess or do not practice, the rigor and the principles of journalism. Okay, I now turning over to Professor Gao to present the rest of the key insights and some of our recommendations.
All right. Good afternoon. Good morning, everybody. I just want to continue a discussion coming from Ben to discuss our fourth insight, which concerns the rise of what we call as anti-democratic actors. We qualify these anti-democratic actors as engaging in disinformation and hostility against such as political free dialogue and institutions. These actors used to be in the fringes, they exist before the election, but they have become central actors to election networks online, and they hijack political discourse in two ways. One is through attacking actors central to the practice of democracy. We see this in the inflammatory attacks against candidates, opposition groups such as progressive activist groups and critics of their patron politicians across key communities in the network. And we see this particularly happening in Duterte Marcos communities. In particular, media is constantly under attack, insinuating bias, incompetency, and even conspiratorial activities. Top among the targets are Rappler, ABS-CBN, and Manila Bulletin. Second, after undermining these groups and institutions, what these anti-democratic actors do is mimic and reappropriate the generic conventions of these entities. These actors invoke the stylistic appearances of news, surveys, and social movements. Only at the surface level, they don't really do the work of writing a news story or creating a scientifically sound survey, but they project themselves as democratic actors too by invoking these labels and appearances. Next slide, please. Sorry, keep the slide. Sorry. Okay, I'll give some examples so you can imagine how it looks like. For instance, sorry. Next slide pala, sorry. I'm a bit confused with my notes. All right. Thank you. The democratic actors we saw across Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube are numerous, and they are spread out in many communities. And they stir the pot right up to the point where they can be dismissed as trolls. And it's often something that we are, guilty, because when somebody is, rowdy, we dismiss them as trolls. But that means that they are overlooked. But these under the radar or below the radar actors, when mapped throughout the network, actually have notable impact in actual conversation by deceiving unsuspecting voters, diminishing social trust in institutions, and debilitating democratic processes. Yet they shield themselves by using this blanket defense of, we're just, part of participatory culture. It's ordinary people voicing out their opinions. They're not paid for by anyone. But despite that, the symbolic and real damage and violence they inflict, specifically on journalists, on experts, on activists, and ordinary people, is something that is real and tangible. Next slide, please. And then looking at our fifth and last point is how the political battle online is already lopsided from the very get-go for those who are invested in social capital in the platform for what we call as influence operation. So I'll talk about influence operation later, but I'll give you some examples of how this entrenched social capital invested in years of operating their political propaganda or political operation on the platforms are manifesting in our data. For instance, it is well documented that YouTube is already populated by Marcos Historical Revisionist channel, and this is part of my previous research. And there are also Duterte political influencers in YouTube as early as 2016. And these channels are easily transformed into electoral machinery through algorithmic community building on YouTube. And these are actually just a push button activated channels. For Twitter, we acknowledge that it's the most accessible platform for ordinary users. So it's historically been the platform of choice for progressives, for leaders of the opposition, sectoral representatives, and activists. And this is where Robredo is actually getting more support because we see that there's an alignment between their values. For Facebook, it is again known that Duterte is very much influential on Facebook, and it's a stronghold across all the platform. And it's been used extensively for his presidential campaign in 2016 and his political propaganda during his administration. And it's not surprising that Duterte communities on Facebook actually cuts across many other clusters. It's not just situated in one, but it's spread out through the community. All right, next slide, please. So what we're seeing is that the election season may only have begun in the past couple of months, but the political groundwork that has been seeded years back and have matured in this time of the election is now providing exponential political gains. It is not only their presence that is notable and established in the platform, but they also have achieved some sort of mastery in navigating the platform dynamics, how to manipulate issue to make it salient and take over public agenda, and how to build communities who politicians can mobilize as their own advocates, brokers, and campaigners. So all insight is really coming from a holistic perspective or big picture of election networks online. Now, we are always asked in interviews and in the Q&A forum that we have the last couple of our presentation, are deceptive activities and other inauthentic political behavior online. And since we are only, approaching this from a network analysis perspective for now, what we really can answer is really, if it's conclusive. But what we can share are indicators of irregular campaigning activities that beget further investigation. So we cannot pinpoint the extent to which this network political manipulation is happening, but we can identify what needs to be further investigated. First, let's have a quick overview of what the social media platforms qualify as network political manipulation. So these platforms have different names for it, different definitions, but more or less it's overlapping with how the terms appear to each other. So the first for Facebook, they call it coordinated inauthentic behavior. So this essentially are activities or actors that engage in or claim to engage in authentic behavior, which is defined as the use of Facebook or Instagram assets to mislead mislead people. So one of the indicators of misleading people is actually lying or deceiving people about the identity, purpose, or origin of the entity they represent. So representing news but not really news is a kind of inauthentic behavior on Facebook. For Twitter, there's this what they call as platform manipulation. So it's any activities that is unauthorized by Twitter, again, to mislead users or other people or disrupt the experience by engaging in bulk, aggressive, or deceptive activity. So similar in terms of the intent to mislead there. And lastly, for YouTube, we have what they call as coordinated influence operations. So these are channels that they believe to be part of large campaigns, and they are behaving in a manner that is coordinated. Often, they target government backed or state sponsored group carrying out attacks against other democratic players and even citizens of their country. So these are the terms that they use. So I'll use this in my discussion later, but more or less they are all the same, such that they are manipulative and inauthentic activities. And actually, the industry practice is they validate each other's effort. So I've been reading their publication about they're addressing manipulation in the platform, and they would say they taken down this operation, and Twitter did too. So there's that coordination between them. So what we will want to share are 5 indicators of network political manipulation from cross-platform network analysis. So the first one really talks about what we call as not what we call, but the pages that are all of a sudden become suspended or unavailable. So among the top accounts on Twitter and Facebook are suspended or unavailable pages. So during data collection, these accounts were one of the most influential in the platform, with high weighted in degree centrality, which essentially means they are most retweeted, they're replied to, they're shared in the platform. But during data analysis, when we actually check the link and open the kind of content that bring, they were suddenly suspended or unavailable for further analysis. This may be an indicator that the platform have already traced these accounts to engage in activities that are violating community guidelines of platforms, and taken that. However, whatever transgressive activities they're doing, the content they're pushing out there might have already negatively impacted the discourse, because by the time they're taking down, their content have already gone viral. So there's that indicator that among the actors that we've tracked, at least for the first and second quarter of the study, there are those that have become unavailable. Okay. The second indicator would be the popularity of what we call as unidentified accounts on Facebook and Twitter. So we categorize the top actors that do not have, salient, professional identity as unidentifiable, and they are unable for publicly available information or publicly declared information in their accounts. They cannot be verified as real people or as having personal traces in other social media accounts. So it's really possible that they are real people being anonymous. They're using an anonymous account for their protection, but there might also be trolls projecting as unique individuals or even automated bots. What we know of is that because their identities are unknown to us and to other users in the platform, their saliency in the network is suspicious because they are in the best position to gain the algorithms, to manipulate the discourse and manufacture public support for particular candidates through hashtag trending, for instance. But because they're unknown, they really can't be accountable for their actions or be cognizant of the consequences of their actions. So that's something that again needs to be further investigated. The third indicator is the circulation of political content being shared from non-political pages, such as entertainment, features, sports, gaming, and meme pages. So there's a lot of, categories of pages out there that we consider non-political, but are actually sharing political content. So these are what we call as cloaked accounts because they are cloaked or veiled, being veiled themselves in generic conventions of categories outside of news and politics. But they themselves are sharing again political content, pushing political content for particular candidates. So we find this behavior or activity manipulative because political campaigning should be obvious and distinguishable. In fact, when you run political ads on the platform, it's actually labeled, as an ad or a political push from the official pages of the platform. And so basically, political campaigning should be overt and distinguishable. But these non-political accounts pushing for political content or packaging the content as something else. It's a way to distance themselves from the formal political communication language or campaigning strategies of the politicians. But what it's really I think most interesting is that they embed themselves in cultural spaces where partisanship is unexpected. So you're watching, a video from an entertainment page, and all of a sudden there's a partisan content. So because it's unexpected, it's possible that it doesn't look like political campaigning at all. It might be stealth, and thus could be more potent in influencing people and their preferences for the election. All right. Number four indicator is what we call as hit and run posting strategy. So we saw this as early as YouTube, but at the same time, we are interested to know if this is something that is already visible also in other platforms. So across a few platforms, in fact, we have seen this trend of mass removal of content from pages, channels, and accounts after it has received massive numbers of views and engagement. So the motives behind, mass removal of content is unclear, but what is common among them is really the content that were taken down. It's inflammatory, it's hostile in nature against particular candidates and groups. So what we surmise is that this mass removal is purposive. There's an intent behind it, because this kind of borderline content is a real engagement driver. Whenever something is controversial or provocative, it is something that really generates a lot of engagement, views, likes, comments, etc. But it could potentially be in violation of community standards. And in Facebook terms, you have been warned because you're engaging in this borderline content. It's in your record. But I think what they do is that before the platforms can detect this kind of activity, they already put down their content and remove any traces of this. So removing trace of the crime of such questionable activities. For instance, we have this YouTube channel called Showbiz Chicadoro. We collected 49 videos from our data collection about politics and elections. And when we got back to it after a few months, actually only 5 out of 49 videos remain in the platform. It's only accessible, and the rest are taken down by the uploader. That's what the YouTube interface have identified. So there's that I guess hit and run posting strategy that I think is dangerous, and in fact in essence that the traces are gone already. And for researchers like us to study these kinds of content, we have to appeal to the platforms to give us their archives of deleted posts, so we know are there a typology or some kind of architecture, the kind of post that is deleted right after they got a lot of engagement. All right. And the last indicator would be the co-option of institutional and professional logics and practices. So I mentioned this earlier, but I want to emphasize this more, because most of these digitally native accounts, meaning they don't have an existence or presence outside of digital media, are not part of any professional organization or affiliated with an institution or a formal body. But their overt strategy in communicating or launching political content actually adapt the stylistic, discursive, and cultural practices of professional media and knowledge industry like the academe or research agency to make it look like their content is legitimate, have undergone the proper research, and that they are trustworthy. So we argue that the reappropriation of such logics without the exercise of professional standard, ethical considerations, and especially that using this logic to advance their partisan political message is actually considered deceptive and malicious. These are indicators of these network political manipulation, and we think that they ought to be investigated further. And that's exactly what digital public pulse will do in our next phases. So next slide. So the whole series this month is really talking about the first phase, doing network analysis, looking at the landscape. Now, the focus for phase two is our content analysis, really doing a deep dive on the topics that's talked about in the content and then by individuals, and classifying them according to their specific categories of actors, issues, and action. We want to know how Robredo's talked about, how Marcos talked about. Are there particular conversations focused on specific issues like the West Philippine Sea or the economy? So after they're determining their categories, we then use a semi-automated content analysis. Having a training data and having the computer also tag the rest of the thousands and millions of data points we have according to their facticity. So how factual or how deceptive the content contains, the affect, so that the sentiment of the post, and the civility. So to what extent are they civil or uncivil? Um, and we want to situate these conversations in the communities where we found them. So it's in context. It's not just talking about the topic in general, but this topic is being talked about in this particular space in the network. And then we also want to engage in what we call as discourse analysis for phase three, really looking at an in-depth qualitative analysis of the discourse. So it's not anymore content, but it's the interaction and the discursive engagement between actors, focusing on the themes that emerge from our analysis. And we have identified the few, as thought starters, but definitely the data's a lot, so we can do a lot of other kinds of angles here. But the few things that we identified would be the weaponization of news as a genre, gender-based antagonism, and co-option of communities, as what Ben mentioned, is the users, entering these communities and doing whatever political agenda they are assigned to do to disrupt whatever engagement or discourse is happening within those communities. So that's all for our cross-platform analysis today. I'm giving the floor back to our MC, Professor Baldo Cobelo.
Ayun, maraming salamat, Assistant Professors Fatima and Ben. What about a round of applause for Ben and Fatima? Ang ating mga masisipag na mga young faculty na alam kong kulang pa ang tulog. All right, so thank you very much once again, Fatima and Ben. Standby lang muna kayo. All right, so this morning we also invited discussants from the Elections-Related Council, COMELEC, civil society, the academe, and the media. Okay. So it is my honor to introduce our discussants to you this morning. But before that, let me explain how this will go. The flow will be like this. I will first introduce our discussants one by one. First, from the elections-related posts or positions, then our discussant from the academia, and then finally, discussants from the media. After I introduce every discussant, each will have a quick, more or less 5-minute response or additional insights on the research presented. After all discussants have their 5-minute spiel, we then dive to answering questions, discussing matters relevant to our areas of expertise or concerns. So some questions will be addressed to our presenters, some will be addressed to our discussants. All right, so let me now introduce our first discussant. Okay, so our first discussant is Louis T.F. Gia, who is a retired election commissioner in the Philippines, having served in the country's Commission on Elections, or COMELEC, from 2013 to 2020. Recently, he co-founded Democratic Insights Group Incorporated, a nonprofit organization promoting voter-centered approach to elections. He is also currently a senior professional lecturer at the College of Law of De La Salle University. As a COMELEC commissioner, he headed various committees tasked to address the electoral access issues of persons deprived of liberties, persons with disabilities, and senior citizens, indigenous peoples, and overseas voters. Prior to his stint in government, he had consultancies in various countries on the subject of election legal framework development, election dispute resolution, and political campaign or finance reform. Mr. Gia was also active in civil society involving electoral reforms and election monitoring work. He co-founded and headed CSOs like the Lawyers League of Liberty or Libertas and the Legal Network of Truth for Truthful Elections or LENTE. He was also a convener of the Consortium on Electoral Reforms. Please welcome Commissioner Louis Gia. Sir?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's an honor to be here. And I participated and was an audience in the first segment of the series, but I wasn't able to attend the two other succeeding sessions because of conflict of schedule. But I would like to congratulate the organizers of this research, and the presentation is really an excellent effort to a very important, excellent effort to to bring to the attention of our voters the phenomenon on online discourse and conversation on political issues. And frankly, I mean, it took some time for me to understand the concepts. I've been quiet. It's been quite a while since I've been in an academic setting. I've been doing some work that are actually that involves a lot of responsibility, that not in an academic setting. So it's really it took some time for me to understand some of the concept, and probably that would be my first reaction. I think there should be some kind of an effort to really popularize and bring the language of the discussion to something that can be understood by the mainstream population, because this is very important. People have got to realize the important and critical impact of social media and online discourse in preserving or promoting the integrity of the electoral process, and preserving our democracy. Now, I've seen the other discussant, and I've realized that probably my contribution to the discussion would be to talk about my previous affiliation with the Commission on Elections. So siguro policy environment yung aking isi-share, no? Now, in relation to what have been discussed, let me say this, that yung policy environment natin in looking at online platforms, social media, is actually almost non-existent. Of course, you will hear COMELEC. You will hear COMELEC saying that it came up with a regulation or a provision in its rules and regulation that touched on how behavior or activities in social media can be regulated in order to comply with some of the existing electoral policies that we have. But let me allow me to make you realize that the basic law or the basic policy that defines how, let's say, candidates and their supporters are to behave themselves during elections or during electoral season is still the Fair Election Act of 1996. Wala nang bagong substantive law or new policy that would somehow address matters that relate to probably regulating or looking at the discussions or political discussion and discourses done online or in social media. So what is the Fair Election Act? It was enacted in 2001. At that time, I don't think there was any anticipation that substantive political discussion that would, influence the result of the election or electoral outcome. It never envisioned that there will be, online and social media discourse. So parating kanyan, ground campaign behavior. So it talks about broadcast media regulation of electoral campaign, on the need of, let's say, media personalities to resign during the election season. And you also have, regulation on the use of print media Alam natin na may limitasyon sa laki ng political ads at yung ground campaign, yung common poster area, the size of posters, and all these things. It does not speak it does not tackle matters that involve the use of social media in campaign or promoting the candidacy. And again, going back to the basic legal framework of election, which is the Omnibus Election Code, and that's a 1985 law. So I don't know if the 1985 law can, and I'm sure the 1985 law could not have anticipated that campaigns would or political discussions would you would go to the point as described in the research today. So what am I saying now? The policy and the regulatory environment is so Jurassic compared to the problems and the issues that it needs to address. And I don't think there is a strong push even among civil society groups and advocates for a reform in looking at our current electoral policies as it in making it more responsive to the current problems and situations. So yun ang nangyayari, of course. So when I was in COMELEC, we are already partly aware, but not really this conscious about the influence of online discourse or online discussion or political discussion. So ang ginawa namin, tiningnan lang namin yung mga regulations because COMELEC is a regulatory agency basically, but it cannot create laws. So the basic policy would have to still be defined by our legislature, and kulang doon. So ang ginagawa na lang siguro yung online media or social media or the online platform can be considered as media entity, and therefore in that context pinapasok sila sa regulatory coverage ng COMELEC, but masyadong tenuous yung pagpasok o yung pag-define ng jurisdiction ng COMELEC over this thing. So I think there has to be a strong push to update our election laws so that it can, or electoral policies so that it can respond to the issues as discussed. At kakaiba ito, and some concepts, new paradigms would have to be developed. And this is something that the civil society should be doing. So I think I've said enough at this point. Thank you so much for giving me time. Salamat po.
Maraming salamat, Commissioner Gia. I'm sure maraming mga na-trigger na mga katanungan at mga, marami pang mga, where to go from here later na mai-address sa inyo, Commissioner Gia. All right, so let me now introduce our second discussant, Dr. Jalton Garces Taguibao, who is a member of the core team of this project. Dr. Jalton Taguibao is Associate Professor of Political Science and Public Management at the Department of Political Science here in the University of the Philippines, Diliman. Dr. Taguibao also served as a member of the faculty of the Asia Pacific Studies Program of the University of the Asia and the Pacific and the Department of Social Sciences at the University of the Philippines, Manila. His areas of specialization are in public policy, policy research and analysis, and research methodology. His research interests are on sustainability, environment, technology, and innovations, and political communication. He currently holds the 2019-2021 1UP Faculty Grant Award in Political Science for outstanding research and public service in the University of the Philippines. Apart from academic work, he has been immersed in policy research and consultancy for government agencies and civil society organizations since 1999. Dr. Taguibao was project and research manager of the Affiliated Network for Social Accountability East Asia and the Pacific, a regional network of NGOs working with state agencies in promoting governance-centered programs and projects. Dr. Taguibao is currently the program convener of the Data Science for Public Policy program of the University of the Philippines System Center for Integrative and Development Studies. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jalton Taguibao.
Good morning, everyone. Maraming salamat po, ma'am, for the introduction. And before I proceed with my 5-minute takeaway, I would first like to, of course, acknowledge and thank our team, particularly our researchers who are heading this project, for the not only the effort, which is really requires really the gargantuan effort, but uh, also introducing something that is very innovative and at the same time very timely, given our current political conditions and of course the electoral season. Um, I wrote several notes across the different occasions and presentations, and I tried to put them together. But for the first 5 minutes, um, please allow me to just point out fairly broad takeaways, and perhaps these takeaways can launch us into more questions later, which I would gladly respond to during the roundtable. I think what we first have to look at, when we have a project such as this, when we step back and when we critically look at the findings of the Digital Public Pulse project, is once again to revisit our ideas of what social media is. What is social media for that matter? And also try to circumspect what is the nature of social media. Much of the findings that were given were not only born out of data that were crunched by the team, but also by the assumptions made by the researchers. Nothing wrong with the assumptions, except that it would be good practice also to revisit it, because by revisiting certain assumptions, we might be open to new insights. For instance, should we expect that social media mirror how politics should be conducted? Whatever is happening in everyday politics, for instance, during the election campaign, is social media simply a universe basically that mirrors it? In short, the things that we know of politics, for instance, are to be expected from social media, or on the other hand, should we be cautious and on the lookout for other things that might come out? This kind of questioning is important because, basically, as mentioned earlier, the terrain of social media with respect to political campaigns really needs a lot of inquiry and very in-depth inquiry. The second is our digital space going to be helpful for undecided voters? How has it been used so far by voters, by advocate groups, by the actors? Decade ago, we were promised by scholars, by the literature, by champions of social media that if this were to be allowed to enter our social communities, if we were to be given greater access, then we would be entering a public space for debate, for discourses, that we would be faced with a marketplace of ideas for political education, for learning, for information. Is this something that we are experiencing as of the moment? What has it become? And in asking or in saying that also, we are also invited to revisit the assumption, are the kinds of behaviors that we encounter so far, this project included, Do we see deterministic behavior? For instance, when there is coordination happening amongst different social media accounts, is this already something, or should this be considered as a manipulation? If there is automation and batch processing, for instance, in the dissemination of information, do we consider that as deceitful behavior? These are things that we have to ask. And contrary to the deterministic view, on the other hand, are we seeing emergent behavior? What are these challenges to authenticity online? Are users capable of distinguishing a person from an online persona? You know, one person in the real world is just that person, where identity appears to be intact, you know, materially. But online, we can take on different personas. We can, in the same way that we can put up different accounts. Is this something that is necessarily, obfuscating or changing the nature of political participation? So those are some of the broad questions that, I would like to invite our participants to try to think about, perhaps ask more questions later. And while this project looks at the political landscape of the Philippine elections, I think that it would be safe to state that electoral campaigns create conditions that simply intensify the dynamics of our online political landscape. Yung politika kasi sa social media, matagal na siyang nangyayari. Kada merong issue, meron putok ng social media advocacies, pro, anti, all these struggles of information, of discourse, this competition of messaging, for instance, happens online. And during elections, these are further intensified. During elections, the intensification becomes coherent in terms of who are the people running, who are the movements and the organizations championing certain political campaigns. So this is a very, very interesting area of inquiry as far as academic inquiry is concerned. I think at this point, I will just stop there. Thank you very much for this 5-minute takeaway. I am now handing over the floor back to Professor Julian Baldo Cubelo. Thank you po.
Thank you, Sir Jal. No, you have raised these challenging questions, and it seems there is so much work left to be done. No, ayan. Thank you, Sir Jal. Let me now introduce our next discussant. Okay, lang. Maraming tabs na naka-open. Nandito na ba ang ating next speaker? I hope our next discussant, Mr. Contreras, is here. Just trying. Okay, sige. Let me introduce you formally, sir. Okay. Our next discussant is Fernando D. Contreras Jr. He has more than 35 years of experience in the field of technology. JR, as he is fondly called by his peers, started working at the age of 13 as a part-time instructor for basic electronics and basic computing. So this is his world, his universe. After graduating high school, he then worked with online Hewlett Packard as part of its MIS and IT team. He then moved to Oracle System as part of their systems engineering team before founding his own company immediately after graduating from college. He founded one of the first internet service providers in the Philippines, iPhil Communications, in 1995. It was also the first company in the Philippines to fully utilize open source technology as part of its core operation. He is a senior executive and founder of several companies, including Imperium Group of Companies. Familiar with startups and company growth, as well as team management handling operations, He has developed a network of partners and contacts enabling marketing of services in several countries worldwide. Currently, he is the president CEO of TerraVive.com Incorporated, an IT solutions company focusing on developing and implementing cost effective business solutions to assist companies in their operations and growth. He is also a licensed environmental planner. It is my honor to introduce you, Fernando D. Contreras Jr.
Uh, Thank you very much
Morning.
for the gracious and lengthy introduction. In the middle of your introduction, I thought it was a different person. But I've been a volunteer for NAMFREL since the 1990s. Even while I was a student, I was volunteering for NAMFREL. What's significant is one of my first company is an internet service provider. We were one of the first in the country, and that's where we saw how the effect of internet affected the political landscape, especially in the campaigning side. We saw some of it happening as early as 1998, but during that time, the campaign would just focus on having a website, their own domain, and an email, and that was it. And everyone was happy with that. We saw changes on the use of internet, and more so on the social media front. Maybe in the Philippine side, you saw we saw the big impact from the perspective of NAMFREL starting 2010, the 2010 election. From there on, it changed little by little. So similar to this coming election where we're seeing changes, for example. So to for example, if you look at the 2019 election, you wouldn't hear platforms such as TikTok being used, but right now that's being used. Facebook, on the other hand, we feel has matured a little, and not fully, but matured a little in terms of how they're presenting. They're taking more responsibility. Late last year, they started being strict with accounts, so that sort of filtered out the playing field in a sense. That minimized troll accounts. However, if you look at it on a bigger perspective, the key there is just to invest more into SIM cards, just a mobile number, and you'll be back there. So from the barrier to entry of having a fake or unverified account just got more expensive. But as we see people pumping more money into the system, into this ecosystem of social media use, it changed also how it's being done. Also, we feel that the more effective tool for the campaigns are still the rich media. These would be videos rather than text, and that's the reason. If you look at perhaps the reason, if you look at the CD market where the bulk of the electorates are, they would believe in videos rather than a well-written text, which is well backed up by facts. So that's a big challenge. And with the age of this so-called influencers and this media creators, they manage to stretch what's reality is. And that's a big problem. We're seeing some responsibility from the likes of Facebook and Twitter and Google on helping minimize the spread of this. But the challenge in social media, in one study that we saw, is that once you release it, a big percentage of the population or the viewer of that content will take it as truth. And based on that study, only 17% can be swayed back. So that's a problem. So once you release it there, it's out in the open, and you get the majority. So then there are ways that people are skirting it by not doing direct mention. For example, Facebook is very strict right now on political campaigns. So instead of doing political campaigns, they're gonna brand it as something like news or historical videos and alike. So that's what we're looking at. Other than monitoring the social media and the internet scene, at NAMFRA, we also focus on the process itself. From 2010 onwards up to the next election this coming May, we will be using an automated election system, and we're trying to work with all group to make it as transparent and as credible as possible. I mean, there have been questions. There's been always this constant challenge with us and those implementing. I mean, Commissioner Louis would attest to that. I mean, it's a love-hate relationship between NAMFREL and the likes of COMELEC, but that's where we are. I mean, our objective is not to get the result of the election, but to make sure that the election is clean, credible, honest, and transparent. So that's for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Fernando Contreras. Sige, standby lang muna, Sir Fernando, okay? Let me now introduce our last discussant for this morning. Of course, our very own Dean, no? Dean Luis V. Teodoro, kami sa MASCOM kahit matagal ng Dean pa rin ang tawag namin. So, Dean Luis V. Teodoro Jr. is a retired journalism professor of the University of the Philippines College of Mass Communication, of which he was dean for 2 terms, from 1994 to 2000. Prior to his deanship, he was thrice chair of the UPCMC Journalism Department. He was vice chair of the Commission on Higher Education's Technical Panel on Communication and the Social Sciences and chair of CHED's Technical Committee on Journalism Education. After retirement, he became a professorial lecturer at the UPCMC, where he taught courses on political economy of the mass media and contemporary issues in communication, as well as on mass media ethics and media and society. He is still is teaching at the UPCMC. Dean Teodoro has published and edited many books, but just to name a few, out of this struggle, The Filipinos in Hawaii, Two Perspectives in Philippine Literature and Society, and Mass Media Laws and Regulations in the Philippines. In fact, a collection of opinion pieces, Vantage Point, The Sixth Estate, and Other Discoveries, received the 2015 National Book Award for Journalism. Dean Teodoro wrote columns for Manila Standard Today, and the Manila Times. He was also editor and columnist of National Midweek Magazine and wrote a weekly opinion piece for ABS-CBN.com. He has been writing a column for Business World since 2007. Ladies and gentlemen, Dean Luis V. Teodoro Jr.
Thank you for that introduction, Professor Cobello. I will start by locating the imperative for critical citizen understanding and use of social media in the context of the democratization process that began during the reform and revolutionary periods of Philippine history. That process, to advance which, demands the making of a citizenry capable of making informed decisions on such matters of public interest as elections, has been interrupted, sabotaged, and undermined by foreign conquest, despotic rule, corruption, incompetence, and deliberately repressive state policies. Information and therefore the media, whether old or new, are vital to it. There is a veritable epidemic of misinformation, malinformation, and disinformation in social media during the current election year in behalf of hyper-partisanship and historical revisionism. Social media are contributing to the information crisis that has been among the many and the rest of Philippine society, which considers that are fair and honest, and whose results are based on the informed decision, being due to, among other factors, the failure of much of the old media of print and broadcasting. There are, of course, exceptions, though rare, to provide the information and analysis a supposedly free people need. Part of the reasons are the political and economic interests of corporate media, the defense and furtherance of which are mostly assured through the gatekeeping process. In addition are also the threats, harassment, and even killing of journalists, which have led to a decline in investigative reporting and other forms of journalistic enterprise. One of the promises is the new media is their being free from the constraints of gatekeeping, and indeed that and such other advantages as their being free from the cost of print and broadcast that limit communication to the wealthy and the government have enhanced everyone's capacity to exercise the right to communicate. That advantage, however, is also its downside in the form of issuances unrestrained by such considerations as accountability, logic, and factual adherence. I might point out that the hate speech, red tagging, and threats against journalists so often aired in social media have also made discharging the essential task of journalism, of providing information via both old and online media in the Philippines, where journalists, by the way, have been killed in record numbers. These have made the tasks of journalists even more dangerous. The problem of disinformation has been addressed by attempts at fact-checking and alerting netizens to such indicators of the malicious use of information as some sites and blogs' shady provenance and poor track records. Unfortunately, these efforts are useful only in the short term, and long-term solutions will have to be found. I suggest that rather than through government regulation, which would adversely affect the right to free expression, only through a sufficiently media literate public can the information crisis be adequately addressed, the results of elections made less distressing, and the democratization process advanced. Media literacy as a subject is supposedly already part of basic education curriculum. But what passed for such subjects at those levels too often consists of teaching students the fundamental skills of video production, among others, rather than developing the capacity to be critical of and to evaluate on the basis of such factors as their political economy what the media disseminate. In addition, the ethics of responsible netizenship, both as recipient, sharer, and disseminator of information, is also glaringly absent in those subjects. In addition to campaigning for clearly conceptualized media literacy courses as part of basic education curricula, I would suggest that communication schools, such as the UP College of Mass Communication, institute short courses on old and new media literacy for teachers and trainers as part of their extension services. In fact, I think it should be like the College of Mass Communications community journalism workshop, that maybe it should be part of those regular that should be part of that should be regularly a part of the college's extension services. The results of the digital public pulse project should be part of the course curriculum that could be developed. Such courses would of course be in addition to those other responses the project has suggested, and would be a signal service to the imperative of developing the informed citizenry that Philippine democracy, such as it is and as limited as it may be, so desperately needs. I will end at this point and will welcome questions if any. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Teodoro. All right, so suggesting to have the findings of the digital public polls to be included in our curriculum is music to our ears. Although maraming kaakibat na trabaho dyan. Okay, so thank you very much to our discussants. Now the more difficult part of your work for today begins. We are opening the session for questions and comments from our guests and members of our audience. But before we start our open forum, we would like to acknowledge and thank the presence of our colleagues and friends from the media, government, civil society, and the academe. Our Chancellor, Fidel Nemeso, is here. Thank you, Chancellor, for your support. Talagang kung walang kabisihan, no, Chancellor is always here. I will read the questions and comments sent in advance currently in my chat box. Some have been sent directly to me, but if you have other or further questions and comments, please feel free to post them in our chat box. We are requesting everyone to keep the space civil and free from any rude or nasty comments. Let me start now reading some of these questions. Okay. All right, sige. So, here is a question. All right. So, kung sino lang muna ang may maunang maisip, no? So, all our discussants and our co-team leaders. As mentioned, many say that the platforms are not doing enough to be proactive. But what is a realistic expectation from them? Is it possible in the long run to ask the platform developers to make democracy work for us when the mindsets of platform users are what appears to be equally or even more problematic? Sige, medyo mabigat ang katanungan. Parang philosophical, moral, moral concern. Sino kaya? Sino ang meron? Parang the question is, meron kasi tayong accountability na hinihingi from the technology itself. Pero sinasabi ng nagtatanong na may hangganan din yun. At the end of the day, the users, the mindsets of the users. Sir Contreras, please go ahead.
There has been a long debate on who's responsible ultimately for the content. Ang position of some groups, for example, I'll switch to my other hat, self-regulation pa rin, hindi tayo papasok dun sa mode ng censorship in which everything gets censored and who will censor the censors. Yun yung maging problema. The challenge with the big social media company, we were in the same position when we were an ISP decades back. In the 1990s, we were asked by the Senate during one of the Senate hearing, should we manage all the content that passed through the internet, our network essentially, because some of it might be libelous, some might be pornographic. Problema yon kasi you go into situation, and our analogy was like putting a dam in the middle of the ocean. So mahirap yon. However, with the social media company, control nila yung ecosystem. Now, they have internal mechanism. Meron silang board, meron silang trustee to guide it. What we were recommending sana is something similar to how the press manage their news. So, first, there's an editorial team within the group. Pwede yun. Pero beyond that, merong bigger group eh. Although, medyo nawawala na rin function. For example, KBP, kunwari. Yung ganong function sana. So, policing among the members. But it would be very bad if you have a regulatory body policing a company. Hindi doesn't match well, Facebook governance has done great lengths in managing their content. Pero yun nga, it's from their perspective still. So how can you make it more open? So yun yung sana something like guided by a community outside the company. So it's hard to manage content of a private company. And the mere fact that we signed up with that social media network, wala tayong magagawa. We have to follow. Remember in the internet world, I mean, if you're using a free service, you are the product. Ganun yun eh. So kung ayaw mo, umalis ka. We have the same situation when TikTok became very famous. Right now, for the millennials or the younger generation, yung mga first-time voter, in fact, some groups are using TikTok as their basis of facts and information. Malaki yung it's the biggest upswing in and from the data that we're seeing, TikTok has only a 9-second attention span. So within 9 seconds, pag hindi mo sila nakuha, iiwan ka. So ibig sabihin, yung goldfish with just an 11-second attention span, mas matagal pa attention span niya kaysa sa taong nagti-TikTok. Ganun na yung mentality ngayon. So when TikTok started, it's the Wild West. You can post anything, you can share to anywhere. Walang walang censorship. Right now, they included some form of censorship, so nagbabago pa rin. But again, we wanted, for example, Facebook would be a good, and Twitter maybe a good source of standard para makita nyo how they manage their own content. Yun lang yung perspective namin.
Thank you, Sir Contreras. Ma'am Fatima?
I mentioned earlier how the platforms are already cross-validating their efforts. So I've been reading, the recent takedowns, and there are a lot of actions made by the platform on, cross-tabulating, I guess, their data and seeing, are the operations happening on Facebook the same, on Twitter, are the patterns the same, etc. But I think, I'm coming from a more political economic perspective, because I think the platform interests, commercial interests, always will be in conflict with democratic ideals. We've heard about Frances Haugen in the US and how she is pushing for reforms on how algorithms function, because ultimately we have to admit that hateful, controversial, inflammatory content are really engaging, and what platforms ultimately want is more people using the platform for longer hours, and them interacting a lot, because they get more data that they could sell to brokers of data and advertiser. So there are a lot of suggestions already. One of the things we mentioned in our previous report would be implementing an algorithmic break. So if not controversial, but activity that's quite suspicious is happening, they should be able to put a stop to it spreading ultimately across the platform, and see and at least slowing it down in terms of its spread, and then evaluating, is this something that is legitimate, is it something that is within or violating the community guidelines, etc. So I think more than the content, because judging all of the content is impossible, it's about managing the regimes of visibility and ranking and relevance in the platform, and making sure that the millions of content out there, we then prioritize particular actors, and it's been done in the US. They have, I don't know, I forgot what it's called, but basically they turned off something like an election protection mechanism, and then they turned it off after after the US election, and then the insurrection happened after that. So there's that, there are those, I guess, evidence of, there are safeguards they can do, but they're doing it for show somehow, tokenistic. But, we want to expect more from platforms because they earn a lot from us.
All right, sige. There are a lot of questions, so siguro yung mga thoughts natin dito on this first question, pwede natin yan makakip mamaya. Right? So we are seeing now like two different opinions, but I guess part of an spectrum, ideally, no? So parang self-governance, self-regulation, and of course, something to do with, platform regulation din, algorithmic break, parang academic break din lang yan na matagal na nating hinihingi. So for the questions addressed, so just to be safe, those sent to me directly, I will not read their names. I assume they don't want to be identified, and those seen by everyone, yun ang babasahin ko ang pangalan. No? So here is a direct question, but please tell me otherwise if you want your name to be read. Here is a question. I am interested in who among our legislators, if any, now can champion the change or amend electoral laws to reflect the issues we've discussed here. So meron na ba? Meron naman nakikita, may nag-iingay na ba in the halls of policy making bodies? The context, medyo mahaba yung tanong. The context is that we assume our lawmakers, who are politicians, have learned somehow to game or to play with the game. So yun na lang muna. Meron pa, or what could be the messaging for legislators to take it upon themselves to work on this? So we are counting on champions kung meron man. So I guess the question is, if you have heard of names na lumilitaw na meron na bang among your circles na meron ba, and perhaps we could plug their names here today. Meron na ba? Meron na ba? Wala pa. Oh, the silence is not a good sign.
There are, but as a member of NAMFREL, I cannot mention their names. We've been invited by several members of the House and Senate who's trying to push for legislation. Ang challenge, they're focusing on the algorithm. Sabi namin, nakakatakot yun because the algorithm can change and people can game it. if you remember, there's this big uptake in Twitter before when the partnership of Min Mendoza saka Alden, ano, yung Yaya Dab, ano, that's the biggest tweet during that time, ano, and biggest retweet because people understood how the algorithm works, and they eventually took advantage of it. Kaya sila yung biggest tweet and retweet. And it's the same situation. Nakikita rin yan, ano? By the way, we cannot discount na malaki rin yung following nung maiingay, ano? For example, the following, for example, of the likes of the followers of the current president. Malaki talaga yung following nila, no? So once they do a campaign, ang bilis lumaki. I mean, we see that. And not because just of trolls, no? May base kasi sila. Totoo yung base nila. So if one of their so-called journalists, kasi we don't consider them journalists, naglabas, talagang ang bilis ng ano. And we were so focused on trolls, but we're not seeing that they're gaming the algorithm. Yun yung nangyayari. They have enough mass to game the algorithm. So yun yung nakakatakot. If we go to legislation, kailangan it's flexible enough. Kung hindi, mawawalan ng flexibility naman yung technology company.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, next question. Direct message. Is it possible that there is one cohesive or coordinated action across these platforms that is clever or even more clever than the intentions of these three platforms combined? Meaning, the coordinated inauthentic behavior has outrun the three platforms since that platforms don't work in cohesion naman. Medyo matinding conspiracy ano to, no? But it makes sense. The question makes sense. Sige sa ating mga, techie discussants. Sir Jalton, yes.
Yeah, just a few ideas. I think that to answer that would really require a lot of evidence, of being able to show coordinated messaging across platforms. But let me just share one particular characteristic as part of the nature of any social network. Is I raised this earlier, is determinism versus emergent behavior. Meaning, if you do something in a network, all you just have to do is to nudge and to be able to locate yourself. If this is something that is intentionally, you would like to do. So you would strategically position yourself in certain critical nodes. Pagkatapos magna-nudge ka lang, meron na kagad siyang epekto dun sa loob ng network. This is a characteristic of any social network. And in addition to that, there are certain actors, for instance, na hindi naman talaga sila directly sinabihan, o maaring inutusan to behave a particular way. But because they are within a network, they would exhibit the same kind of behavior. So to answer that question, it would take a lot of evidence and a lot of analysis, a lot of crunching to be able to show that something is done deterministically and with intention. But what we on the other hand saw, given the evidence, was emergent behavior as well. There could be, siguro yung term na ginagamit ngayon, merong mga natitrigger. So pag na-trigger sila, nudge sila, nagkakaroon ngayon ito ng reaction, nagsusnowball ito. And then all the other social dynamics would come into play. I think that being able to investigate something like this, siguro kaya interesting yung next phases nitong project na ito kasi dito sa phase pa lang natin ngayon na part 1 ng project na ito, nakita lang natin yung broad characteristics of networks. But if we are interested in looking at the mechanics, the social dynamics that's happened specifically under or within subnetworks, baka doon marami tayong makuhang insight, no? Bakit yung network na dati wala naman biglang sumulpot? Bakit itong influencer na ito dati nagbebenta lang siya, nag-online shopping lang siya, nagba-vlog na siya, ngayon may partisan affiliation na kagad siya. Itong conversion na ito na nangyayari within networks ay nangyayari talaga at nakikita na natin, pero kailangan din natin itong kailangan natin tingnan ng mabuti. Mahirap kasi yung conclusively, ang hirap magsagutin yung ganong klaseng tanong. Yun po. Salamat po.
So talagang more time, more sleepless nights. Sir Ben, baka meron kang gustong idagdag.
Just to add to Sir Giles' inputs, no, kasi this is actually something that we planned on doing before. No, we talked about how do we, unitize. I think that was our term before. No, how do we unitize like an actor performing behaviors across the 3 different platforms that we examined. No, itong actor na to, paano natin matatrace kung paano siya nagbe-behave sa Twitter, sa YouTube, sa Facebook, and right now we really have no way of doing that, no, which is why that kind of coordination, no, is really difficult for us to trace, no. But I think what we're seeing now is there are patterns naman, no, from certain actors, from certain groups that are consistent across the 3 platforms, no, which I guess siguro it's some sort of evidence already, no, that maybe it's part of a larger, grander campaign, no, enacted within these 3 platforms. And maybe in our next phase, mas materialize yung mga ganon. Who are the ones speaking up and sending out the same types of messages? What types of messages are they sending out on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube? No, are they the same? Are they targeting the same types of affect, emotion, and so on? No, so really in our phase 2, that's something that we want to discover.
So we have opened the door to Narnia. Tama ba? DPP team. So much to do, so little time. Sige, let me call on one brave individual. Sige, Ma'am Fatima,
Sige,
before I call the one who raised his hand.
Yeah, just to add, I think people think about, inauthentic and real people as, a dichotomy, mutually exclusive. But, when we see the data, I think it's such a chicken and egg problem because when, again, sabi ni Sir Jal, you trigger something, people follow because they've developed effective relationship with these people, cultivated a particular mindset, a particular worldview. So anything you say could be a trigger or, they volunteer to speak for you because you've already established a relationship. That's why influencers are so potent as, an intermediary because they build that relationship. Feeling mo yung influencers talking to you directly on the screen, kamusta ka na, ganyan. And you feel, especially in the pandemic, we need social, some social interactions. They are those mediated versions of social relationship we have. So I think, it's a chicken problem. The inauthentic activities can exist in confluence with real people being mobilized for a campaign.
Okay. Sige. Christopher Tirambolo? Huh? Raise a hand. Say, go ahead, Christopher.
Hi, good morning po. I just want to ask that the commissioner said earlier that our electoral law is Jurassic. But in spite of the in fairness naman po dun sa mga lawmakers natin, they passed a new law which regulating the cybercrime and anything else. In what way pa po yung kailangan pang magkaroon ng, kumbaga, paano pa kailangan maging updated? Kung ano pa po yung kailangan i-update sa election law? In spite na meron naman pong existing, for example, cybercrime law, at saka yung POMELEC nagkaroon din sila ng guidelines sa mga running politician na kailangan po nila magkaroon ng 100,000 subscribers sa kanilang official social media account.
Okay.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Unang-una, syempre, ang pinag-uusapan natin yung environment ng discourse sa election, particularly yung pangangampanya. Of course, the first step that we should be asking ourselves is how do we define integrity of the elections? What public good do we want to gain out of our electoral process? Ano ba gusto nating mangyari? Siguro quickly, and this is very pedestrian, no? Ayaw natin ng fake news, ayaw natin, and dapat accessible yung mga information para makapag-isip ng tama. Are our existing election laws responsive to that need? Ang sinasabi ko lang kanina is that, since ang platform na dominant ngayon, lalo na sa pandemic, is online, then probably hindi yung ating existing laws do not really respond or hindi siya adequate para mag-respond doon sa current situation. And your question is ano pa ba ang dadagdagan? Okay, election laws in general. Our election laws was yung ating Omnibus Election Code is a 1985 vintage. Now, alam nyo, martial law yung context ng election law. Iba na yung context ngayon. And then you've heard of the controversies on candidacy, on substitution, on who's going to succeed, on election. All of this are because our election laws are patterned after a different environmental framework. Hindi siya updated. Yung mga definitions ng concept, even modern concept of democracy is no longer hindi na responsive yung bagong so that is what I meant. Now specifically for the information environment around election, siguro ito rin yung isang bahagi na tingnan. Pero I take the advice that perhaps it does not make sense to really regulate the content itself. No? Pero at least na pag-uusapan. Now, what are the examples of policy proposals? May mga sinabmit na mungkahi na yung CYA, know your client, dapat walang anonymous account. May mga ganong proposal. But I know, hindi naman din wise yun in all circumstances because some of the social media platforms were used by democracy activists in some areas where fighting democracy is, promoting democracy is dangerous. So kaya importante din yung anonymity. So yun yung pinag-uusapan. What I'm saying is there's not enough discussion along that line except for a few advocates. At walang masyadong demand from the public for our politicians to take notice. And particularly in this campaign, there is walang puwersa para i-take up ito as an electoral issue para yung iboboto mo, gawin niyang agenda to. That's what I'm saying, sir.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Louis.
Thank you po.
Thank you, Christopher. Okay, so
Julian, I just
Yeah.
want to add, I don't know if this is in the jurisdiction of COMELEC, but I'm really curious that, there's this whole industry supporting these candidates to run their campaign. Yet, again, the transparency of who they're hiring, how much they're spending is not there. There was a recent report of Marcos Jr. spending $0 on Facebook, yet in our data, he's like the number one or the most salient politician there. Of course, again, we can attribute in authentic activities or organic ba siya, but we know that there's a discrepancy there. So if one of the things I think should be something really consider is the idea of political spending. Is it just political ads? What are other categories that might be included or might be counted as political spending? And I think at least scratching the surface, sino ba yung mga PR agencies, sino ba yung advertising agencies supporting these candidates? Because usually what happens is after they win, lalabas yun na, ito yung architect ng social media project ni Duterte, for instance, lalabas siya after. Pero before winning, below the radar, they're operating and they're earning a lot because there's lots of money being poured here. So that's one of the things I wanted to contribute as something to revise or reconsider.
okay, Sir Contreras, please.
It's one of the avenue that we were trying to monitor before, political spending on campaign. Ang malaking naging problema namin, the undeclared one, hindi mo pwedeng bilangin. Ito, biggest example lang. Maglagay ako before the campaign season na napakalaking tarpaulin or billboard, just stating my name, J.R. Contreras, kunwari. Party list. Yun lang ang sabihin ko. Technically, it's not campaigning. So the law is relaxed on that aspect. You pointed out one good case. If you look at the campaign, for example, of the two leading candidates, for example, BBM and Lenny. Lenny's spending a lot that's documented on Facebook. You can check Facebook directly how much they spend. They have reports. BBM, wala. But yung mga supporting groups, how do you classify them? For example, I support a candidate. Sisingilin ko ba yun sa bilang ni BBM, ni Lenny? Yun siguro yung mahirap na isa batasan. And everyone's gaming it. For example, Sino bang kandidato hindi naglagay ng malaking billboard? Diba? Wala. I mean, teka, lumabas ba yun sa bilang? Hindi. Campaign season hasn't started yet. So technically, hindi pa bilang yun. So yun yung, we had the same problem. We were trying to monitor campaign spending sa NAMFREL. So we're limited also in that aspect.
Okay, sige. So,
Ah,
Sir Jal, si Sir Jal,
I-
no? And then, Dean Doro?
Yeah, I was going to say that there are other forms of advertising. I mean, that do not look like advertising. In fact, they look like editorial content. And sometimes that is what happens in broadcasting, for example, where someone is irregularly interviewed, no? Or there are instances in which news programs regularly cover a certain candidate because there have been under the table arrangements between that media organization and some of the broadcasters. I presume that that is also happening in social media, and one of the indicators of that is, of course, the proliferation of all these sites and all these accounts on social media, which are partisan for this or that candidate. So actually, one of the problems in the Philippine media is this kind of the use of this kind of advertising. In old media, for example, in broadcasting, you see very often people being introduced as political analysts and so on and so forth, whereas some of them are actually just the PR people of certain candidates. But because the media endows stature and legitimacy and so on, as we know in in communication theory, what happens is that okay, what they say is taken as Bible truth. So some of that is also happening in social media.
Okay. Thank you, Dean. Yes, si Sir Jal and then Sir Louis, and then I will read more questions, and then I will call two participants raising their hands. Sir Jal?
Yeah. Na-mention na ni Dean yung mga mahalagang konsepto. Magkaiba, lalo na sa isang eleksyon at sa kampanya, magkaiba po ang PR at saka ang advertising. Yun, I think tinuturo din ito eh. No? So magkaiba ang paid advertising, ang libreng advertising, ang paid PR, at saka ang libreng PR o yung may mga under the table. Sa practice po, in fact, kaya nga na-realize ko lang ngayon na maganda sana kung meron tayong naimbitahan na election strategist or campaign strategist dito. Kasi nagkaroon po ng wave, I do understand, there was a call actually of different political strategists to their respective principals a year ago, even 2 years prior, of the need to set up online campaign ecosystems. Thinking about what's happening with the pandemic and also the rise of the importance of social media as a space for campaigning, meron silang mga advice na binibigay sa mga balak tumakbo. At sa pagkakaalam ko, may strategy yun, no? A part of it could be through advertising, a part of it would be through PR. And what did this project actually unearth and also expose? The findings in this project actually affirm the observation that our election campaigns at this time are really PR mediated, influence mediated sila, no? Hindi natin ma-establish kung ito ay mga binayaran, pero ang alam natin ay hindi advertising, at least for some candidates. So there are candidates who progress and prosper purely out of PR. Talaga kung walang idideklara dyan basta-basta na kung magkano ang binayad, no? Similar to any product endorsement, for instance, whether it is authentic or inauthentic, paid or otherwise, which is very different from advertising, like what Dean said earlier, in the traditional and conventional media sense. You're paying for space, ad space. You're paying for Kaya naka-measure ang laki ng poster, naka-measure ang haba ng oras, no, kapag may TV ads tayo. Sa social media ba, matatakasan mo yun o magagawa mo yun? Pwede bang i-regulate yung laki ng meme, for instance, yung resolution size niya? Ganun din ba yung gusto nating gawin? Ano? And this also shows us the difficulty that is encountered when we make things formal legal. Nasi-circumvent kasi yun eh. Katulad yan, yung sa guidelines ng COMELEC recently, ideklara kung ilan ang followers at kung ano ang official account mo. O ideklara mo yun. Pero hindi mo kailangan ideklara kung ilan ang tagasunod na accounts mo kasi unofficial sila. Kapag ka merong dinisseminate na message o kaya hirit dun tungkol sa kalaban, may deniability kagad yung official account na sasabihin, teka lang, hindi naman namin ni-release yan eh. No? So all of these form part and parcel of that ecosystem of campaigns, which to a certain extent, some of our formal legal interventions can address, but also are deficited. No? Hirap kasi, katulad nga ng sabi ni Commissioner kanina, may ano tayo, meron tayo ditong lag. Naglalag talaga po yung yung formal legal, yung mga batas, guidelines na intervention kasi nakikita natin kung paano ito ginagamit as of the moment at naghahabol po itong mga ito. Yun lamang po. Thank you po.
Thank you, Sir John. Sir Louis, you have additional comment or gusto mo ba we go ahead to the next question?
We can go ahead. Yung sinabi ni Professor Tagibaw yun sasabihin.
All right. Thank you. Sige. So, here is a question from Erwin Siron. Are we seeing political polarization in our country just by looking at the platform of the choice of Filipinos? Okay? And sige, bago sumagot, babasahin ko rin ang direct question. Just want to ask the researchers, this is addressed to Fatima and Ben, who is winning the social media space among the candidates, or maybe which kind of actors are winning the space and why? What are the implications for the upcoming elections? Thank you po. So siguro yung isa, yung post seen by everyone, are we seeing political polarization in our country just by looking at the platform of choice of Filipinos? Sino gustong mag-respond to that? Kanina merong comment na hindi naman talaga ito 100% reflexive ng kung ano man ang reality on the ground. Pero meron pa ring follow-up question on this one. Or these are two separate realities, no? Two separate universes. Sir Jal, go ahead, please.
Ang election ho talagang polarizing ho yan, natural ho yan, kaya may social media o wala. No? So yung condition pa lang po ng election, polarizing na talaga siya because there are those who advocate for certain parties, certain candidates, others remain undecided. Now, are these manifested, for instance, in the platforms of choice? Ang lumalabas dito sa pag-aaral, dahil tatlo yung platforms na pinag-usapan, may kanya-kanyang kultura sa loob, may kanya-kanyang style of interaction, no? So basing it on the findings of the research project, meron talaga. Now, the question is that polarization? Maka-Facebook ba ako? Hindi ba ako maka-YouTube? Kung kayo po yung tumatakbo, abay gusto nyo lahat yun. Gusto nyo present kayo sa lahat in your own little way that your messaging is present. No? Pero nagkakaroon ba tayo ng pagkikita o paglalabanan nung taga-Facebook at saka taga-Twitter o taga-Twitter at saka wala po tayo. Ang nakikita actually natin ay attempts to converge them under as much as possible from the point of view of someone running a candidate under a particular candidacy or particular campaign. No? So yun po ang mas nakikita natin. Thank you po.
Sige, nako, madami pang questions. I still have actually 3 unread, so our team will do our best, no, to send the questions to our discussants. Pero yun, the last question is what is that? Sort of a forecasting from Fatima and Ben, and then may we hear na lang your last words, Fatima and Ben, our co-team leaders, before we officially wrap up this program. Ben, Fatima?
Julia, is this in response to the question or just last word?
Yung who is winning, and then last words. Thank you.
Ako baka recorded pa naman to, baka ma-quote kami. Of course, the death of winning is actually nebulous because winning in the election is actually counting votes, right? And social media, what I guess, and what it means in social media could be many ways. One could be your popularity, how salient you are, but that could also be negative in a sense na salient ka pero tinitira ka na ibang kandidato or ibang grupo, no? Sikat ka for the wrong reasons. But maybe in elections, bad publicity could be good also, in to certain extent. Another aspect of winning could be, are you reaching, a lot of people? Are you reaching communities that are otherwise neglected by particular candidates, communities that are not historically involved in politics, for instance, so mga interest groups, they're not political, but they are engaged in political activities, may mga ganun tayong discussion. So I cannot answer categorically who's winning. In different aspects, there are winners, I think. So, sige, example na lang, one salient aspect, sa Twitter ba yun, Ben? Or sa, nalito na ako, yung, sa Facebook. For example, Lenny's supportive group are, noisy and, the most salient in a sense because they're sharing a lot of information. But Bongbong Marcos groups on Facebook actually are highest in betweenness centrality. What that means is essentially they are connected to more diverse audiences and communities. So it's different definitions of winning, if we are to call it winning, but different at least influence. We can qualify that as such. So it is many things. That's why we're doing a lot of, using a lot of metrics to measure influence or, how salient their messages are. But ultimately, we think that this is just a sneak peek of election. It will intensify in the next couple of months, especially with the official campaign season starting this month, right? And we expect more data to come in. What we I think the rest of our audience today and the public is what then is changing from the earlier months of the election season to the next couple of months. Are there things that are just intensifying, they're shifting or changing? That's what we expect to see, and we can perhaps attribute these changes with even changes in formal survey results. We'll see, but ultimately that's what we can promise for now. And I guess to promote also that we will have the next phases of study released in April. So hopefully you follow our page and see where when we'll be releasing the results of our phases 2 and 3.
All right, buckle up because there's more to come. Thank you, Fatima. Ben, last words, final words.
Siguro sagutin ko lang din yung concern on winning, no? Kasi I guess that's one of the things that we want to emphasize in our study na we're not trying to predict who's going to win in the elections. We're not presenting, no, kung sino yung nananalo. Kasi nga those are, we think of social media in a more nuanced way, no? Just because they're being talked about doesn't mean, they're winning people's, sentiments or votes, no? Which is why really we presented multiple metrics, no? So I guess that's our call to stakeholders, to voters, to think of digital media in a more nuanced way. Just because someone is trending online doesn't mean they're dominating the elections. It's possible that they're trending because they're being attacked. Some people are becoming noisy, but that doesn't mean they're reaching large audiences. Perhaps they're talking to more of the same types of people, no? So again, it's being, as a voter, it's being conscious of that, no? Hindi enough na nag-iingay ako, kailangan may nare-reach ako mga bagong tao. Hindi enough na nagte-trend ako, siguro kailangan positive yung pinag-uusapan tungkol sa akin. So yung mga ganung bagay, I think those are our initial insights that we've developed during the phase 1 of our research, and hopefully we provide more nuance, more inputs, that can help really voters, stakeholders, COMELEC, the policymakers, and all of these stakeholders that can benefit from the results of our digital study.
There you go. Thank you very much. And let me thank our discussants. Thank you for saying yes to our invitation. Dean Luis Teodoro, Dr. Jalton Tagibaw, Sir Fernando Contreras, and Commissioner Louis Gia. Huwag nating palalampasin ang pagkakataon na tayo ay magpapapicture. Sige, si Sir Ben ang magko-command sa atin, di ba? Hindi natin yan makakalimutan kahit 11:58 na.
Ben, you're on mute.
Unmute.
Sorry. So I'm switching to gallery views. I hope everyone in the room can turn on their camera so we can do a quick photo op. Okay, I'll give you like 10 seconds. Okay, going on. Bye. Sige, 1, 2, 3. Okay. Okay, ito pa po. Sige. Okay, one more. Okay. 3, 2, 1. One more. Sorry, there are 2 pages in the Zoom room. So stay lang po yung meeting natin. 1, 2, 3.
Ayun. Okay na ba, Sir Ben? Thank you very much. Ayan, magpaparicopy na lang tayo ng picture na yan. And now, our esteemed Chair of the Department of Communication Research, Dr. Randy J.C. Solis, will formally close today's program. Sir Randy, take it away.
Thank you, Ma'am Julian. To our University of the Philippines Diliman Chancellor, Fidel Nemenzo, Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs, Luis Sonido, colleagues from the academe and students, friends from civil society organizations, our discussants, to our media partners, and to all of our attendees today, good morning or good afternoon. In my classes, especially with the younger students in the college and department, in my effort to make my students feel that they are taking a relevant course and for them to get inspired, I often tell my students that information and communication are the new gold. I tell them that in a deeply mediated and mediatized society, those who are equipped to harness communications will become the movers and the rulers of society, whether for social good or whatnot. Media and communication technologies have affordances that, as we have learned from our research findings in the past month, allow us to create networks and steer discourses about important events and issues in our life. Affordances like algorithmic connectivity, hashtags, curated networking, framing, designing, and priming texts and visuals, we've heard this from our past research findings, and so much more are available for users to exploit and take advantage of. We have also seen that those who are knowledgeable about these affordances are able to generate presence and connections online. And some have even dominated the discursive landscape about the elections on the 3 most prominent social media in the country. The mediatization of society also tells us that while it is helpful to look at individual media and their affordances, a media-centered approach or perspective tells us to also look at media as convergences, as cross-platform analysis, as cross-platform connectivity, and as a wider media environment. And our researchers did that. We first looked at YouTube, and then Twitter, and then Facebook. And today we presented a cross-platform analysis of these social media to emphasize that a converged and convergent media ecology, not to sound pessimistically deterministic, is indeed powerful enough to push forth media-constructed realities. As in this research, that certain candidates are more popular than the others, that lies are believed to have become truths, or that villains have become heroes in the eyes of the voting public. And this is where it becomes dangerous for those who do not understand how information and communications have indeed become the new gold in a deeply mediatized society. This is precisely why the Digital Public Pulse project was conceptualized. The DPP project under the Philippine Media Monitoring Lab of the SALIC, a hub for excellence in communication and media research in the Philippines, of the Department of Communication Research, University of the Philippines, Diliman, is our way of contributing to the democratizing efforts in the crucial time of the elections by doing what we know and do best, research. I thank our DPP team with our co-heads, Professors Fatima Gao and John Benedict Bunkin, together with Doctors Fernando Paragas, Maria Rosel San Pascual, and Julien Baldo Cubelo, with our research collaborators. Thank you, Dr. Jalton Tagibaw, of the UPD Diliman Department of Political Science, and Dr. Geoffrey Solano of UP Manila Department of Physical Sciences and Mathematics, and our collaborators from Rappler. I thank them for being tenacious and brave enough to engage in this precarious terrain. We started too idealistic, aiming for world emancipation using our research tools. But as we progressed, we learned that this is, of course, all easier said than done. Some of them have actually experienced being attacked by trolls. Some of them were on the verge of breakdowns in the midst of waves of the pandemic, with this long-running research coming in on top of their responsibilities as teachers, researchers, extension workers, friends, family, and lovers. But in the spirit of Padayon, they persist and carry on, because in the department, all we want is, as we say it, world peace. And so on that note, we still invite you all to join us in the second phase of our research in April. This time, moving beyond the networks formed in the social media, we look at what are the discourses formed and how are these stirred and steered. We will now look at the content of these conversations about the Philippine elections, which will now make more sense and provide a more holistic picture of the network analysis that we have done this month. We would also like to especially thank our media partners who bridge us to those whom we ought to reach with our insights from this research, our voters. Our DPP research challenges the media and the academe to be more innovative in our ways of connecting online and to have bigger voices in the election discourses. And I know that we are already doing efforts to achieve this with coalitions like Check.ph and now Rappler's Facts First, all the media events and discourses and webinars organized by various organizations, all these so that voters become more empowered in choosing their future leaders come May. I thank, again, our media partners for joining us in this endeavor. I did say that information and communications are the new gold. I hope that by equipping ourselves, we all become richer as human beings and as voters in this country where more and more are deprived of the right information and the voice to participate in a democratic society. The Philippine Media Monitoring Lab is doing our part to help our society become richer. I hope our friends here will do theirs too, moving forward to the elections and beyond. Thank you very much and Happy Lunar New Year to all.
Yay! Thank you, Sir Randy. That's it. Thank you to our colleagues and friends for participating in the last session in our month-long weekly series of research presentations on the 2022 national elections and social media. Sana may konting hapo, no? Pero please, we hope that you join us again sometime in April. Keep well and stay safe from the Philippine Media Monitoring Laboratory. Maraming salamat at magandang tanghali na po. See you soon. Bye-bye, everyone. Happy lunch.